Hello and welcome to a very special Catholic Unscripted. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
Gavin Ashenden.
And joining us today very kindly is Stephen Brown from Catholic Arena in Ireland. And he's joining us before this week comes to an end because Ireland could become the first EU state to recognise polygamy. The government is proposing two distinct amendments to the Constitution. And so, Stephen, can you tell us what the Constitution currently says, what the government would have it say, and why this is significant?
Yeah, so firstly, thanks for having me on. I suppose the first thing to say is our Constitution was written originally in the 1930s. And a big part of our government's plan over the past 20 years has been, promoting the idea of liberalism by deconstructing the Constitution, by presenting it as a form of oppression and a form of theocracy, let's say. And so we've seen referendums eventually where divorce was legalized, same-sex marriage, abortion, and this particular one pertains to the definition of the family and then the definition of the role of mothers in the home. So the two amendments, the 39th and the 40th Amendment that are being tabled, one is in relation to the role of carers, and the other is in relation to the role of mothers in the home. Now, the problem is that there are so many problems with this referendum. One of the problems is what's being proposed to be put into the referendum is that families will be defined as a durable relationship. So a lot of prominent people, including former Attorney General and Senator Michael McDowell, has said that durable relationship is such a vague term that you could have basically people who, they could be married, but they could have 5 lovers, and the 5 lovers can, show up after the person has died and say, well, look, this is a durable relationship. And the government has kind of dismissed this, but these are very serious people saying this is a very serious problem. And a big part of the problem is the government has been in power for so long. Fine Gael have been in power for 13 years, so they've just gotten used to just, like a steam train, just going through everything. So they haven't debated this properly. They just said this is what it is. And Michael McDowell pointed out this week that they deliberately put the vote on March 8th for International Women's Day because they wanted people to talk about it. But it's kind of backfired in some other ways because the other amendment, the 40th Amendment, is to talk about women in the home. And for the past however many years, 10, 20 years, the opponents of, let's just call it Catholic Ireland, have claimed that the Constitution says that a woman's place is in the home. So this has become an urban myth that the Constitution says a woman's place is in the home. What it actually says is that a woman has a special role in the home and that she cannot be forced by economic necessity to the neglect of her duties in the home out of the home. So in other words, basically the government, if a woman is at home with 2 kids, they can't say, look, we're not going to support you, you need to get out of the home. And now I understand it is up for debate, but the point of it is the government has presented it in a very dishonest way by, even today they released a couple of video ads where they were saying this document says that your place is in the home, and the Electoral Commission has said over and over again during this campaign, this isn't true, this is not what it says. So it's very, what has happened is it's kind of come at a time in Ireland where the government, as I said, have had a lot of successes in the past 10 years with different referendums, including like there was one in 2019, which was basically to speed up divorces. So they've had even mini referendums where they're successful like that. But the point, what's happened the past few years is I think since COVID especially, you've had this growing resentment against the government. And the growing resentment then has come from other quarters too. You have immigration is obviously a big one at the moment. Emigration is a big one at the moment. Like people talk about young people leaving the church, but there's more young people leaving the country than leaving the church. So they're leaving this project of liberalism that we're having. And the other thing I'd like to point out is we've had a strange phenomenon in Ireland for the past year with proposed hate speech laws. And we've also had, a very unusual, which I think they've had in other countries, uprising against that from feminists and people who would normally be opposed to you know, what is seen as Catholic Ireland. So they're actually leading a lot of the way against this. So the government has a very wide variety of people who are annoyed about this and don't really trust it. And there was a TV debate last night where Maria Stein, a Catholic barrister, you know, she was debating and she said, you know, can you guarantee that a Muslim man who arrives in the country, who is a polygamist, that he won't have his family recognized? And they couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't have the family recognized. So this is the thing, they've, if they're going to change this and put this in the Constitution, so many other things are going to follow for them. So a lot of lawyers, a lot of politicians, senators, they're warning that chaos is about to ensue because of it. So I think we're reaching a point where Liberal Ireland was just starting to believe in its own grandeur a bit too much. So I think it's the people are kind of trying to put the brakes on it and say there's something really wrong if, as a country, we're prioritizing these pointless referendums, because nobody's ever been stopped from going to work because of this amendment about women in the Constitution. Like they're claiming that women aren't allowed to work, or they never have been, you know. So it's I think people are saying we need to put the brakes on this. Something needs to change. So it's been a strange past few weeks, because it looked like the government, even up to 2 weeks ago, were way ahead in the polls, and now the bookies are saying that it could go against them in both of them. So
Goodness, well, as a woman, the idea of something written into the Constitution that says women cannot be forced by economic necessity to work outside the home is something I wouldn't want to see slip very readily. And it's I mean, the funny thing is, as you get older as a woman, and as you become a mother, and as you work with other mothers who are killing themselves to try and earn a living that they have to earn, because two parents now need to work in order to be able to afford a home and to function, that they really are at their wits' end, many, and if you speak to them, they'll admit that. And so, as you say, it's not this women's places in the home, but I think that's a protection I would not want to see disappear as a woman.
Stephen, can I ask, so I know Maria Stein. She was organised a conference I spoke at in Dublin a while ago. She's a very competent and incisive critic. And if we take the point that she was raising, as I've understood it, this notion of a durable relationship is intended to replace Christian marriage. And even if you're going to have, whatever you're going to have replacing Christian marriage, I would have thought is not going to be as good as it. I say that as a Catholic Christian, but also I trained in the law, and we have everything from civil partnerships to homosexual marriage. So we already got a few different examples. The idea that someone's really trying to legislate for durable relationships is absolute nonsense, because there isn't any way you can define that. And therefore you open the gate to legislative and cultural incoherence. What's behind the government wanting to replace Christian marriage with legislative incoherence? Is it a mistake? Is it just a reflex progressive thing? Let's kick out the old religion and bring anything else in, particularly if it helps the Muslim immigrants? Or is it a strategy to deliberately replace one culture with another?
I don't think I could give them the credit of having strategies, like long-term strategies like that. But I think there's a couple of things. Like, there's so many layers to it. One senator, Neil Richmond, went on television about 2 months ago, and he said that this is very important. The durable relationship definition is so important for immigration law, and he said that it's very important because if you're in a durable relationship with somebody who is not living in Ireland, the state has to recognize that, so then they have to give that person citizenship. So that was one aspect to it. Another aspect to it then is the government were saying, so if you were to take them in good faith, right, their good faith argument would be that you have families where they're not married, so they never got married, but they had children or they had houses together. But as people point out, we already have so many rulings in our courts and in our different laws that really it's not an issue for most people. And the other thing is, if they wanted to do that, they could have worded it exactly like that, but they decided to say durable relationships. So the whole thing just, it reeks sometimes of incompetence, and then other times it just reeks of we don't know what they're up to. And a lot of people have spoken about it. They just say, I don't know why they're doing this. I don't know why they won't tell us what it means.
So the reason for voting no is to stop the floodgates of relativism, immigration, incoherence, and replacing something that was already fixed with something that isn't fixed when the thing that's fixed is not broke. So, I mean, the risks of this, of saying yes, are just enormous with almost no benefits. Isn't that right?
Yes, I can't think of, I mean, in other referendums, they've brought people to the fore and they've said, this person's life would have been better off if we had this amendment. So this person, let's say, who was, you know, suffering from, let's say it was domestic violence, they could have said, if there was divorce, they would have had an easier life. Let's say with abortion, you could have said, this person's life would have been saved during their pregnancy if we had abortion, or let's say it was something like that. So, but with this one, they actually haven't really brought people to the fore and said, if this person, you know, so part of it makes me think they don't really believe in it. Part of it makes me think that it's just part of the bigger picture of this iconoclastic kind of deconstruction of Catholic Ireland, that it would just be a big signal for them if they could turn around to their voter base at the next election, which would be before the end of this calendar year probably, and they could say to them, oh, we got rid of the woman in the home, the the thing that said women were in the home. So some of it is that too, that it's just, at this point, it's about keeping up the myth that we were oppressed once upon a time and we're not now.
Father Brendan from the Brendan Option podcast said, Ireland seems to be entering a spiral of something close to self-destruction, with help given by Catholic clergy. He talked about scandals and then said there's inactivity in the public square with any sound arguments based on faith with regard to this referendum. Would you agree with him?
I would say, generally speaking, yes. And I think I wouldn't say it's all out of. I wouldn't say it's all out of, let's say, cowardice, if that's kind of the assumption. Some of it too is just the idea that they might actually harm the chances of people voting yes if they, or voting no if they spoke about it. So sometimes they're actually afraid. But I think that might have been the case in the past. But I think with this one, it's not, because I think the people are actually generally confused about it, and the people are growing very restless with what's happening in modern Ireland. So I think the church shouldn't be afraid to show itself against the bad things in modern Ireland. This is a good opportunity for it. I'd say in general, there is the idea that that the guidance isn't there from day to day, and you know, with these sort of issues, and in some ways they've stepped up, in other ways, you know. But I think the church here is going through so many crises in terms of numbers, in terms of land, and that plays a big part then into how it deals with politics, because they speak up on a referendum. You know, this is what happened in previous referendums. All of a sudden, the rhetoric is up then about seizing church lands in payment for Magdalene laundries, shutting down church schools. So there's this whole bigger game that's going on, which I suppose we don't see as lay people. And so, but having said that, I don't think they should shy away from, you know, guiding people. And if something is really not feel right, they should speak up about it, you know. So that's why it's difficult sometimes when feels like it's left to lay people, because we can speak up, but we're not the moral guides as such, you know. We're the people who can speak up and be active, but we're not the source of moral guidance as such. So I think that bit of
really
moral authority,
because that's where we are in Ireland, isn't it? So like you probably don't know, but both Catherine and I are sort of second generation immigrants. So we've spent a lot of time in Ireland. We've got a lot of Irish family, and it does seem like the hierarchy have undermined themselves so much that anything they say at this point just does further damage to the Catholic cause, doesn't it? So it's one of our big themes as Catholic Unscripted, is that we're in a position to step into that void, and you know, as lay people, and to make a difference by putting across an intellectual position from the church and having the arguments without any of that baggage, really, because we are the people who've been abused, aren't we? We are the ones who've suffered from those things, and yet we can still see that the family is the building block of society. It's absolutely crucial to, and this seems to me to be a very direct attack on that fundamental building block of society, isn't it? It's quite beautiful in the Irish Constitution what's written there, especially when you see, you know, we've just had the budget in the UK, and Jeremy Hunt is saying that he's going to introduce more childcare or find a way for more childcare so more women can go and work, you know. Well, how about we built a society where, you know, women could afford to stay at home and look after their children if that's what they chose to do. And, you know, as Catherine said earlier, it's never stopped anyone from going to work, has it? You know, so if you wanted to.
Yeah,
I think the Irish bishops are atrocious. I really do. I think you spoke really beautifully and very generously there of them. But in all the previous referendums, they do more harm than good because they speak against our position most of the time. You never know, like they don't seem to know the faith or be able to articulate it. All bar a few, like Fonzie, he's about the only one, I think, isn't he?
Yeah, but you do really feel, don't you, that it's in Ireland, more so than here, is that sense of shame and lost credibility and lost moral authority. And that's a really sad state of affairs then, because, as you say, we need our clergy, we need our priests and bishops to have that confidence again and to speak up and be a voice, because there's so much confusion. As you say, there are people who are wavering. They don't really understand the implications, perhaps, of this change. And there's such rich teaching and beauty, as you've just said there, Mark, of you know, why support women to work outside the home when actually it would be really great to see our government support them to be able to be more present to their families and to their children. That's a beautiful thing. That's a really, really positive thing. And if our clergy can't speak up for the home and for the family and for women, especially in this day and age when women are being eradicated in sports and elsewhere and with the transgender ideology, we really do need to defend woman as mother, as wife. And of course she can be a CEO and she can be a doctor and a lawyer. Great, do what you want, but don't make it more difficult to be a mother and a wife. Sorry, Gavin.
I am muted.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
You just come to the end of a very important sentence. I'm muted because I've got into the habit of threatening people with my heavy breathing. And, so one of the things that Stephen's done tonight is to convince me, I think, of something of an embryonic idea that's been bubbling away, and that is that in Ireland, as obviously you know better than me, the level of anti-clericalism has reached terminal proportions, and so I think probably Stephen's right in saying that that if the clergy were to weigh in, it's a moot point as whether or not the advice that they give is actually counterproductive or not. And since that's the case, that's okay, because there's still, you know, like Maria Stein and Stephen himself, there's still the articulate laity who've got a very clear understanding of what the issues are. And they can speak without any of the baggage of child abuse or property abuse or institutional abuse or whatever. And so that's what Stephen's doing. It's great to see it. It also makes me think that one of the reasons why this matters from our point of view is that what happens in some parts of Europe, Ireland being part of Europe, happens in the UK. And the idea that people are constitutionally trying to change the definition of the marital relationship with a durable relationship, which first of all diminishes Christian marriage and secondly helps the Islamic situation, which you know is a double whammy. Once again, having had a conversation with a politician today and talking about the vacuum of authoritative ethical conscience that the church leaves, I think what we're saying is that lay Christians have a very serious duty to do what we're trying to do tonight, which is freed from the institution, freed from the clerical shadow, whatever it is. We need to take responsibility for telling the truth. And I love the way in which what you've articulated, Stephen, is that lay Catholics in Ireland are saying, this is a nonsense, don't do it. This is a political strategy, it's a trap. It'll open the floodgates of incoherence and a form of intellectual and social anarchy. Don't do it. Very encouraging to hear that the no vote might win then.
Yeah, it's certainly the tide is starting, and it was very interesting because, you know, in 2018 whenever Maria Stein or anybody remotely Catholic appeared on television, I mean, it was you know, it was satanic. I mean, people would just be up in arms once they got the whiff of anything Catholic. And then last night I was following on Twitter, and people who wouldn't necessarily be Catholic or necessarily be even remotely conservative were saying, "Wow, she's brilliant. I really like her, and she sounds honest." And so, you know, we're in an interesting position now in Ireland where so many things have changed over the past 5 years. I especially think in the past year, like you had Graham Lenihan who wrote Father Ted, and you know, it's very interesting. I mean, a lot of the people who are supporting him are Catholic people, you know, and
I'm
the
one of them.
yeah, you know, and it's just a strange way that things have turned around. So I think that there's so many opportunities for us if we look for them. And this referendum, I think, has been a good opportunity for Catholics and for people who are, you know, remotely conservative to have a broader base. And I can see it happening now in real time, because a lot of the concern of feminists and especially feminists who are maybe against some of the trans movement is their concern is that erasing mother from the Constitution is really designed to erase women from the Constitution.
Yeah.
And so in a bizarre turn of events, they're kind of looking to, you know, if not necessarily the church, then people involved with the church as allies, you know. So this idea
I think that's the key thing that I see behind it, is that it's a alphabet people move. That's how it seems to me, and that's been one of the big things in Ireland, and it's been a problem because the church hasn't had the bottle to stand up and put any sort of counter position, has it?
No. And in fact, like we've like a big, you know, we've a big problem we have here now. It's a problem, but I don't really know what the quick solution to it is that our church is so interwoven with the state here, but in really like bizarre ways. Like, I mean, you have such a large percentage of the schools are Catholic in ethos, and technically they say, oh, the church runs them. But the funny thing is, they tend to actually be the most liberal, because when the orders left, they left them to what would you call them, trusts, like schools trusts, and they actually are incredibly liberal, you know. There was one of them last week had a try a hijab day in the school, you know. And so it's, if I went in and you know, if you went in and you said we're going to have a try a confession day, they'd be told, you know, get out of here. So it's
try a nun's wimple day.
Yeah, so
it's ridiculous. Sorry, go on, Stephen.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like, so we're kind of at a point where the church is so wed to so many different institutions, and it's being pushed out with a lot of them slowly but surely. And I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing in some cases, but I think we should definitely be more clued into using the institutions that we have, like schools. I mean, are a fantastic resource. Like, we have so many of them. And the other thing I'd say is that, like, there's so many great sites around Ireland, and pilgrimage sites and other things that, you know, and buildings and that could be used to harness, like, you know, get-togethers for people, or these people who are looking for, you know, if they're campaigning for an issue like this, you know, that we reach out and say, here, look, we've this venue if you want to come speak at it, and we'll, you know, because we've a million of them. In when I say that we, you know, the church as a whole. So I think as a church, yeah, we haven't been very good in Ireland, I don't think, at teaching people like doctrine and theology. We're very good with people one-to-one. You know, there was an incident a couple of years ago where Leo Varadkar was speaking in the Dáil, and he said something about, he accused someone else of being like a priest who, like, puts on a show for people, but in secret was committing loads of sin. And for some strange reason, I don't know why, you know, you could go into Dáil tomorrow and say, oh, we need to kick the Catholic Church of Ireland, and nobody would bat an eyelid. But for some reason, when he criticised the idea of an individual parish priest, people were outraged and he had to apologise. And it was very interesting, because it just showed that people actually like, they're anti-clerical as an idea, but they actually love a priest one-on-one as a person. Oh, he's my priest, I like him. You know, I don't like the rest of them, you know. So I think that's one advantage that we have, but we should use that to our advantage and not be afraid to kind of like teach people a bit more and have deeper conversations, because that's what we're missing. We're missing the intellectual foundation, and people are ready to vote a certain way, and they'll say, "Oh, sure, I'm you know." It's kind of Joe Biden Catholicism, you know.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say missing a intellectual foundation, and it's very true what you said there about the priest. And as you say, that's something to tap into, because it's all is not lost. But it is ironic, isn't it, Mark? We've both got family in Ireland, and of our generation, we're the only Catholics, practicing Catholics, serious Catholics, but our Irish cousins still do First Communion and have all the cultural attachments. But given that that's still there, that's something to work with. But you talked about intellectual foundation, and Mark, I don't know if you've got there to pull up, which I think is really a powerful short extract from Pope Benedict XVI's The Spirit of the Liturgy, which I was just reading recently, and it seemed pertinent to this conversation. And we were also saying how there's so many opportunities to speak up, and I thought this gives us a little bit of food for thought, and to the Irish, who the people in Ireland who will be listening to this and watching, to maybe consider as this vote comes on Friday. It's a bit long, but it's beautiful. So this is from The Spirit of the Liturgy by Pope Benedict, and he's talking about the Sinai, at Mount Sinai, about the Israelites, and he says, "A people without a common rule of law cannot live. It destroys itself in anarchy, which is a parody of freedom, its exaltations to the point of abolition. When every man lives without law, every man lives without freedom. In the ordering of the covenant on Sinai, the three aspects of worship, law, and ethics are inseparably interwoven. This is the greatness of the Sinai covenant, but also its limitation." And then he goes on, and I think this is really, really powerful stuff. "In the modern age, this unraveling has led finally to the total secularization of the law and the exclusion of any Godward perspective from the fashioning of the law. But we must not forget that there is an essential connection between the three orders of worship, law, and ethics. Law without a foundation in morality becomes injustice. When morality and law do not originate in a Godward perspective, they degrade man because they rob him of his highest measure and his highest capacity. It deprives him of any vision of the infinite and eternal. This seeming liberation subjects him to the dictatorship of the ruling majority. When human affairs are so ordered that there is no recognition of God, there is a belittling of man. That is why in the final analysis, worship and law cannot be completely separated from each other. God has a right to a response from man, and where that right of God totally disappears, the order of law among men is dissolved, because there's no cornerstone to keep the whole structure together. Sinai gives Israel its interior land, without which the exterior land would be a cheerless prospect. Israel is constituted as a people through the covenant and the divine law it's received. It received a common rule for living. This and this alone is what makes the land a real gift. When the reality of Sinai is lost, the land too is inwardly lost, until finally the people are thrust into exile. Whenever Israel falls away from the right worship of God, when it turns away from God to the false gods, the powers and values of this world, its freedom too collapses. It is possible for it to live in its own land and yet still be as it was in Egypt. Mere possession of your own land and state does not give you freedom. In fact, it can be the grossest kind of slavery. And when the loss of law becomes total, it ends in the loss even of the land. I thought that's very powerful stuff, isn't it? About this idea of a land being more than just a piece of geography, that it's the spirit of the people. And this is what I think we're talking about, that the island is in this very unpleasant place where it's sort of in danger of not recognizing the beauty of the law that has been the cornerstone and the anchor of its people. And in anger, probably for some people, they don't quite realize what they're about to throw away.
If I can add, sorry, Stephen, go ahead. Please answer, Mrs. Bennett.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, Pádraig Pearse, when he wrote before the 1916 rebellion, he said that people have thought of nationhood as a material thing, but he says a spiritual thing. Now, he didn't mean in a deistic way that it was you worship the land. He meant that the idea of being a people together and being a country, you have to look at it from a spiritual point of view. And in the preamble to the Constitution, the first thing it says is, in the name of the most holy Trinity, from whom all authority and to whom as our final end all actions both of men and states must be referred. So it's in the Constitution. I think this is the next thing they'll try to get rid of, is that it says that our authority comes from God. And it actually says, my favorite part of it, it says that God sustained our fathers through centuries of trials, which I think has this extra connection to it, So I think that's where the church needs to really engage people, because this idea that the church started in 1922 when we became independent, rather than, the church, people forget, the church was with people at Mass Rocks, it was with people in saying Mass in secret for them when they were being persecuted. And that's what the church has to be bold in saying. Well, you can't isolate a couple of institutions. You can bring justice for them, but the bigger picture is the church was on Irish people's side, and it still is today, or it should be. So, sorry, Gavin, go ahead.
Catherine's, but what I was going to say follows on exactly from that. Catherine's piece from Benedict reminds me of one of the criticisms of the progressive position, which is made but never clearly enough, and that is that the progressive position always says, you're victims, you're suffering from injustice. Let's get rid of the injustice for you, and then picks an easy target, usually a parody. And the conservative or the Christian position ought to be exactly what is the utopian state you're taking us to. So what is the alternative, the creative alternative? It's very easy to destroy, and the whole progressive agenda is one of destruction and taking to pieces. But if when they're asked the question, so what is this society that's constructed around durable relationships going to look like? And then what we discover, of course, is it's a myth. It's built on resentment and revenge and destruction. And the theological perspective on that is the devil never creates, he always perverts. And so the progressive agenda is one of constant perversion, but without ever replacing it with anything durable, good, visionary, or with qualitative differences. And I think conservatives are always so often on the defensive, taking, if you like, the progressive campaign slogans too seriously, saying we're going to save you from injustice, when actually what they're really doing is marking the fact that they have actually nothing to offer as a template for the future.
I think that's beautifully illustrated in this example as well, because you've got something quite beautiful and obviously something that's enshrining the rights of the family and women in the Irish Constitution, and what they're planning to replace it with, no one even in the Dáil seems to be able to work out what it actually means. It's just typical modernist gobbledygook, isn't it? It doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, I think there's this idea that we're we're kind of like in a post-government era, that whatever those people are in the Dáil, I don't think you call them government, and they don't see themselves as such. They see themselves as just the arbiters of a new, as Gavin says, a utopia of liberalism, progressivism, and it doesn't matter what it is, they just want to bring it in. And I think that we've reached a real crisis point in our country. We had riots in the streets in Dublin a few months ago, and the violence and the despair that was on display. This was the despair of a people without God. This was despair of young people who look into the past, very recent past, and they have this glorious history, this religious history, and it's had the rug pulled out from under them. And this is their way of saying, we've had enough of this. We don't want this. So when 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when they're offering these other referendums, other elections, and if they had said, let's look into the future, what's this going to offer? We're looking at it now. We're looking at it in birth rates collapsing by 25% in 10 years. We're looking at young people right in the street. We're looking at young people emigrating to Australia. And so we're looking at housing crisis. We're looking at, every sort of problem you can have. And the last thing that we're looking at is the benefits of all the things that they promised us. So I hope people are realizing now, and I'm sure more that are than maybe were 10 years ago, but I hope more people are realizing that even if you might agree with some of the things that they're putting up for vote, the world they're offering is not true, and this isn't going to bring it about. So as a
Stephen,
people, I think we need to come together.
Can I ask you a stupid question? I'm normally stupid questions get stupid answers, but I'm hoping my stupid question might elucidate quite a wise answer. And I don't think it's my question only, which is why I want to put it. So, having become a Catholic, my view of Irish history has changed. The kind of the in the water English nationalism that I inherited I've had to look at again. And as a Catholic, I've seen the virtues of the Irish struggle against English colonialism. And so I then look at it and say, well, okay, well, the Irish were really good at kicking the English out. Let's assume there was a degree of oppression. Obviously, it's a mixed picture. Let's assume there was a degree of oppression. You kicked the English out. You created an Irish society of its own. And now a worse oppressor than the English has come. And it's a mixture of unlimited immigration and these progressive, careless people who are abusing Irish culture and Irish nationhood. If you could kick us out, I'm thinking of the riots you had on the streets. Where is the Irish spirit that kicked the English out but can't kick out the internal oppressor? Is that too stupid a question, or has the Irish sense of national identity suffered some kind of collapse since you got rid of us?
It's it's a good question. I suppose there's a couple of ways of looking at it. One thing I'd say is, if you've ever read Eamon Duffy's book, The Stripping of the Altars, where he talks about this. Yeah, yes. And I suppose one thing to remember is, I'm always taken aback when I go to Europe and I see all these old traditions, and people are like, oh, it's Saint such and such is there. We jump up and down 5 times in our lovely uniform or whatever, And I'm like, what? So there's a whole history that was one history that was wiped away. But you have all these other histories wiped away at different times. The different families that were forced into exile. Hugh O'Neill, who was eventually buried in Rome, and you had you had other things then, like our language. The language is a way of thinking too, because our language is very theological. Like hello is Diagwich, God be with you. And so as these were progressive different things that happened. The other thing to remember is in the opposition to British rule in Ireland, and actually the reason I brought up stripping the altars too was just to point out like that the kind of things that we were suffering. Obviously, a lot of English Catholics suffered them too under the same people, essentially, and when you look at it, the progressive way that things went, really, there are so many times where Irish people were quite patient over those centuries. Like, if you look at it, it was actually very progressive. There was different rebellions in each century, and you still had Irish people made up a sizable portion of the British Army in the 1800s and early 1900s. You also still had a lot of Irish people were, like, put it this way, I mean, the famine happened in the 1840s. You had the penal laws were only repealed in 1829. And so you only had Catholic churches only started to be built in the 1840s. You had a massive loss of population, maybe half in 1840s. And, Queen Victoria is held up as the famine queen. But when she visited Ireland in 1900, a lot of people, James Joyce wrote about this, how he was kind of disgusted by it, that people showed up to greet her on the streets. And there were in the 1880s or 1890s when boycotting started. So there was Captain Boycott was a landlord who upped his rents, and so the people decided to stop paying him and shunning him, and people wouldn't have anything to do with him. So Pope Leo XIII wrote a letter to the Irish saying, this is not a Christian way to deal with someone. You shouldn't boycott somebody. But like, the idea of boycotting somebody is not a Christian way of dealing with it. So the point I'm getting to is, it was a very gradual thing that we actually, but when 1916 happened, I mean, these were incredible intellectual people, Pádraig Pearse and Joseph Plunkett, and incredibly Catholic, deep-faithed people. And so, like, a lot of their feeling was rooted in faith. And so, you know, you could trace, there's so many different explanations over the century of what happened in the past 100 years. But I think we're at a point now where our definition of what it means to be Irish and opposing British rule. I'll give you an example. You know, there was, you know, like, let's say with Sinn Fein. I mean, you know, Sinn Fein decided in the 80s and 90s fighting for independence means, you know, violence. And now it means you have Michelle O'Neill's First Minister singing God Save the King. So I know people might say she's making peace and that's important. I understand that. But the point is, you know, where's the moral consistency here?
I never thought as an Englishman I would say, where is Sinn Féin when you need them?
Yeah. But the problem is too, like, they've become very liberal. And so a lot of the people who are they, if you look at their voters, right, like, they've had a big problem recently. They were the biggest party. They were the most anti-immigration party, but they had the most pro-immigration leadership with the most anti-immigration voters. And so you have this. So we have so many problems in our country now with we have problems with, obviously, immigration. You also have a problem with the social fabric, a loss of faith. You also have this idea of United Ireland, which I actually don't see happening anytime soon. But the whole idea, things will be better once it's United Ireland. Like, that's our goal, you know, we'll just sort it out then. And then I suppose the other thing I would point out is our idea of ourselves as a people, I think, is very negative in lots of ways. Our self-esteem is not very good. And I think like, when people watch all these films about Magdalene Laundries and Angela's Ashes, and there was the other one with Steve Coogan in it, Philomena, you know, and they don't make good movies about our history, you know. People are demoralized. They're fed with all this stuff over and over and over again about how bad the past was, how bad we were as a people, and all these other things. So I think, as a people, you know, why, in short, you know, I would say our actual opposition to the English in Ireland, you know, for the most part, I mean, there were times where it was just in places where it was normal, and so on and so forth, and then, like, our relationship in certain areas, and then there were times then where, as a whole, especially since the 1840s, people rose up against. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I suppose it's complicated is my short answer. And there's a lot of psychological things, you know?
Yeah.
It is a complicated answer. It's a very good answer.
I think we grew up thinking of the land of saints and scholars. You know, it's the place where I got my faith from, and one of the most beautiful. My family from Mayo, from the foot of Croagh Patrick, and it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. You know, if you go to America, where we tend to go, us three occasionally, you know, the Irish over there are extremely proud of their heritage. And so, at the same time, I think Catherine and I'd agree that, and I'm always saying this to my mum, you know, like, that I'm much more of a Mediterranean Catholic than an Irish Catholic, because the Irish Catholicism is lockderg and dry toast and beating yourself up, and, you know, whereas the Mediterranean Catholic is a lovely meal and beautiful mass. And, you know, in Ireland, mass is 18 minutes, it's too long. No.
I think to draw to an end here, as Ireland goes to the polls just tomorrow, I suppose, when we get this up, it's worth reflecting on the words of Chesterton, who said, "There exists in such a case a certain institution or law, let's say for the sake of simplicity, a fence or gate erected across a road. The more modern type of reformer goes gaily up to it and says, 'I don't see the use of this, let's clear it away.' To which the more intelligent type of reformer will do well to answer, 'If you don't see the use of it, I certainly will not let you clear it away. Go away and think. Then, when you can come back and tell me that you do not see the use of it and have reasons, I may allow you to destroy it.'" And I think that's worth considering as you go off to the polls, because in some sense it's going to make a significant change to your constitution, and once it's gone, it's gone. So I suppose the message there is, be careful what you get rid of if you don't fully understand the value of it. So from us, it's a vote no on Friday, isn't it, Stephen?
Yeah. Vote. We say vote no because some people are saying vote yes no, vote no yes, as in because there's 2 votes, but vote no no, and it's great to have your support because in a lot of these past referendums, Irish people have been told the whole world wants you to vote a certain way, and they're like, oh, we better do that. And with the past year or two, people have seen the reaction online to our potential hate speech laws and so on. And people have realized a lot of people are like, whoa, there's something wrong going on here. So the more voices speak up, the better it is, especially for Catholics, because it's great to see people being motivated.
Yeah, there's a huge movement of young Catholics over here in England, and a real renewal. And my own daughter's coming into the faith at Easter, and we're in Southwark Diocese, and there are 400 or 500 young people coming into the church. So there's a lot of hope as well. So yes, our Irish brothers and sisters and our ancestors, let's not forget the beauty of our faith. Thanks very much for joining us, Steve.
Thanks
Stephen,
for having me. Thank you.
You're doing a brilliant job with Catholic Arena, by the way. It's really going well, isn't it? On Twitter, X, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's going good. I mean, it's kind of for times like this. It was set up after the previous referendum, so it was for times like this. It's just there to be a voice, and just for some of the positive things in the church that are happening, like the things with the Latin Mass and things with other things, just to be a voice for the people who do good work.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well done.
Well, thank you so much for everything you do, and keep being that voice. And if you don't yet follow Catholic Arena, do check them out. So thank you so much once again. And thanks to all of you for watching, and please do visit our website, catholicunscripted.com, where you'll find our blogs and much more. Thanks for watching. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
I'm Gavin Ashton, and vote no.
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 That's where you say no again, Stephen.
No, 10 times over.
There we are. Okay. Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Right.